Montana, 1887. There is an arithmetic the world uses to measure a man, and there is a different kind of counting that measures his soul. Silas Croft had forgotten how to do the second kind. The first kind was easy. He was 54 years old. He had lived on this ranch for 30 of those years. He had been a widower for 5. He had one dog, Gus, who was 9. He owned 400 acres of land that felt like 4,000 in the silence. These were the numbers. They were solid and dependable and cold. They were the fence posts that marked the boundary of his life, and he no longer looked for any gate. His wife, Martha, had been the one who understood the other counting. She could measure a day, not in hours worked, but in the quality of the light slanting across the porch floor. She could calculate the worth of a neighbor, not by his acreage, but by the way he helped a man mend a fence after a storm, asking nothing in return. She had been the heart of the place, the warm, beating center that made the cold arithmetic of survival feel like a life. When she died, the numbers remained, but the value was gone. The house was too large for one man. He knew this with the dull ache of a recurring bruise. Every empty room was a testament to a life that had been halved. He cooked his meals in the big kitchen, his single plate looking small and lost on the long trestle table. Martha had insisted they build a table meant for family, for neighbors, for the noise of living. Now its polished surface reflected only the bowed head of a solitary man and the flickering flame of a single lamp. He had stopped expecting. That was the simplest way to put it. He did not expect the winters to be easy or the summers to be bountiful. He did not expect conversation in town to be anything more than talk of weather and cattle prices. He did not expect the ache in his chest to ever truly fade. He had made a quiet peace with this lack of expectation. It was a form of armor. Disappointment could not find you if you were not looking for anything to begin with. His days fell into a rhythm as predictable as the sun's journey across the vast, indifferent sky. He rose before dawn, the chill of the floorboards, a familiar shock. He made coffee, the smell filling the kitchen with a ghost of mornings past. He and Gus would walk the fence line, the dog's quiet presence a comfort that asked for nothing. He worked until the sun was high, repaired what was broken, tended to what was living, and ate his meals in silence. He did what had to be done. It was enough. It had to be. Then she arrived. It happened on a Tuesday in late spring, a day of such startling clarity that the distant mountains seemed close enough to touch. He saw the wagon first, a speck on the horizon of the dusty track that passed for a road. It was moving slowly, haltingly, like a wounded animal. He watched it from the porch, his hand resting on Gus's head, a flicker of something that was not quite curiosity, but a deviation from the norm. He watched until it stopped completely, a good mile from his gate. He did not go to it. It was not his business. People had trouble on the road. They usually sorted it. But after an hour, the wagon had not moved. A figure, small in the distance, was walking toward his ranch. He stayed on the porch, waiting. He was not a man who went looking for trouble, but he was not a man who turned it away from his door either. Section. As the figure drew closer, it resolved into a young woman. She was not hurrying, but walking with a steady, determined pace that spoke of exhaustion held at bay by sheer will. She wore a simple, travel-stained dress and carried a small bundle. When she finally reached his gate, she did not call out. She simply stood there, waiting to be acknowledged, her hands clasped in front of her. He descended the porch steps, Gus trotting silently at his heel. He stopped a few feet from her. He saw that she was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 25. Her face was smudged with dust, but her eyes were clear and direct. They held no plea, only a straightforward assessment of him, of the house, of the situation. "Axle's broken," she said. Her voice was low and even, without a trace of panic. "The wheel is splintered right through." He nodded, his gaze drifting past her to the motionless wagon. "That's a bad break." "I know," she said. She did not elaborate. She did not offer a story of misfortune or woe. She stated a fact, and the fact was that she was stranded. He looked at her for a long moment. He saw the weariness in the lines around her eyes, the set of her jaw that spoke of a long and difficult journey. He should have sent her on her way, told her the next town was 10 miles east and that someone there could help her. It was the sensible thing to do. It was the thing that would not disrupt the careful, quiet order of his life. "You'll need a wheelwright for that," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. "I know," she said again, "but I have no money to pay one, or for a room to stay in while I wait." She paused, and her gaze was unwavering. "I'm looking for work. I can cook, I can mend, I can work a garden, and I'm not afraid of hard labor. I'll work for my keep, and whatever you think is fair to earn the cost of a new wheel." Her name was Ilara. She had come from the east, she said, without saying what she had left behind. Her parents had passed, and she was making her way to Oregon, where she had a distant cousin she had never met. The story was sparse, but he believed it. There was a truth in her stillness, in the way she did not try to embellish her predicament. He thought of the empty rooms in his house. He thought of the fence on the north pasture that needed mending, of the vegetable garden that had gone wild since Martha was gone. He thought of the silence. "I have some work," he heard himself say, and the words surprised him. They felt foreign in his mouth. "You can use the spare room off the kitchen. It's small, but it's clean." "Thank you," she said. It was not effusive. It was a simple, solid statement of gratitude. And so the quiet rhythm of his life was broken. The first few days, he watched her. He was not trying to be subtle about it. He observed her the way he would a new horse, checking for temperament, for strength, for soundness. She moved with a quiet efficiency that he found himself admiring. When she swept the porch, she did not just move the dust around, she swept it clean, her motions deliberate and thorough. When she mended one of his torn work shirts, the stitches were small and even, stronger than the original seam. She did not speak much, and he was grateful for it. The silence in the house changed, though. It was no longer the heavy, oppressive silence of emptiness. It became a shared silence, punctuated by the soft sounds of her movements, the scrape of a chair, the clink of a spoon against a bowl, the quiet hum of a hymn as she worked in the garden. It was a silence that was alive. He showed her the stretch of fence on the north pasture that had been damaged by a winter storm. "The posts need to be reset," he told her, expecting her to say it was too much for her. "I'll need the post hole digger and the wire stretcher," she said, her eyes already measuring the work. He left her to it, assuming she would manage a few posts before giving up. When he returned hours later, the sun beating down on the open field, he found she had already reset a dozen posts, sinking them deep and true. The wire was not yet stretched, but the foundation of the work was solid, the kind of work a man who knew his business would do. Her face was flushed with effort and streaked with dirt, but her expression was one of deep concentration. He stood there for a long time, just watching her work, a strange feeling stirring in his chest. It was respect. It was a feeling he had not had cause to feel for a long time. That evening, he came into the kitchen to find a stew simmering on the stove. The smell of it, rich with herbs she must have found in Martha's neglected garden, filled the house. It was the kind of smell that belonged to a home, not just a house. He sat at the long table, and she placed a bowl in front of him. They ate in their usual silence, but it felt different. After he had finished, he looked at the empty bowl. "It was good," he said. She simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. A week turned into 2. The fence was mended. tighter and straighter than it had been in years. The garden was cleared of weeds, and neat rows of seedlings were beginning to sprout. The house was cleaner, the windows washed so clear it felt as if the outside had been brought in. Every morning when he came into the kitchen, a cup of coffee was waiting for him on the table. She had learned how he took it without asking. He had started leaving a lantern burning on the porch if he knew she was out checking on the chickens after dark. These were the small, unspoken kindnesses that began to build a bridge across the silence between them. They were gestures that did not have to be made. One Saturday, he had to go into town for supplies. As he was loading sacks of flour into his wagon, Mr. Abernathy, the proprietor of the general store, came out onto the boardwalk. Abernathy was a good man, but his eyes missed nothing. "Heard you got some help out at your place, Silas," he said, his voice casual. Silas grunted, not looking up. Fences needed mending. "A good hand is hard to find," Abernathy continued, packing his pipe, "especially one as comely as that. Young Jedediah Thorne was in here yesterday, asking about the girl whose wagon broke down. Seems he saw her when he was riding his line." Silas stopped what he was doing. Jedediah Thorne was the son of the wealthiest rancher in the county. He was young, handsome, and had a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He was exactly the kind of man a young woman like Alara should be looking for. The thought landed in his gut like a stone. "That's his business," Silas said, his voice flat. He finished loading his wagon and drove off without another word. The drive home was quiet, but his mind was not. He thought of Jedediah with his easy smile and his fine horse. He could offer her a life, a real life, not just room and board in a lonely old man's house. He could give her a future. Silas could only offer her a past. He was doing the arithmetic again. Jedediah was 28, Alara was 25. That was simple, correct arithmetic. Silas was 54. That was an equation that did not balance. He felt a coldness spread through him. He had been a fool to let her stay. He had allowed a small measure of comfort to seep into his life, and now he would have to pay the price. He was just a stop on her journey, a temporary harbor. Soon she would earn the money for her wheel, and she would leave, or Jedediah would come calling and she would leave. The ending was the same. He would be alone again in the too large house, but the silence would be louder than before, because now he knew what it was like to have it filled. We pause the story for just a moment here. I want to ask you something, and I hope you will answer. What country are you listening from today? Please drop it in the comments below. It means more than I can say to know where this voice is reaching, to know that we are sharing this story across towns and states and even oceans. It means everything to know we are connected in this small way. Now, let's get back, because Silas is about to be reminded that some things cannot be measured with numbers. Sure enough, the following Sunday, a buggy pulled up to the house. It was Jedediah Thorne, dressed in his Sunday best, his hair slicked back. Gus growled low in his throat from his spot on the porch. Silas stayed in the shadows of the doorway, watching as Jedediah walked up to the porch. Alara came out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked at Jedediah, her expression polite but unreadable. "Miss," Jedediah said, sweeping off his hat with a flourish. "Jedediah Thorne. My father owns the Rocking Tea. I was hoping I might have the pleasure of taking you for a drive." "That is kind of you, Mr. Thorne," Alara said, her voice even, "but I am occupied with my work." "Surely Mr. Croft can spare you for an afternoon," Jedediah said, his smile unwavering. He glanced toward the doorway where Silas stood. "It's the Lord's Day, after all." Silas felt a surge of something hot and unfamiliar. He stepped out onto the porch. "Her time is her own," he said, his voice hard. "She can do as she pleases." Alara looked from Jedediah to Silas. A flicker of something passed through her eyes. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice a little softer, but just as firm. "But I must decline." Jedediah's smile tightened. He was not a man used to being refused. He bowed stiffly. "Perhaps another time." He turned and walked back to his buggy, the dust rising behind him as he drove away. Ilara turned to Silas. "I apologize if that caused any trouble." "It was no trouble," he said, turning to go back inside. But it was. It was a world of trouble. He had seen the way Jedediah looked at her, and the way the world would see it. A perfect match. And he had seen the way Ilara had looked at him, Silas, before she had given her final answer. It was a look that asked a question he did not know how to answer. The next day they were working together, replacing a rotted post at the corner of the horse pasture. It was a two-person job, one to hold the post steady while the other tamped the earth around it. They worked in their usual comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds the thud of the tamper and the chirping of birds in the cottonwoods. He had to say it. It felt like a duty. It felt like the only decent thing to do. "Jedediah Thorne comes from a good family," he said, his eyes on his work. "He'll have the biggest ranch in this valley one day." Ilara did not respond immediately. She continued to hold the post, her hands firm and steady. "I am sure he will," she said finally. "He could offer you a proper life," Silas went on, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "A home, a future. You are a young woman. You should not be fixing fences for an old man." He risked a glance at her. She was looking at him now, her clear, direct gaze holding his. The sun lit the stray wisps of hair that had escaped her braid, turning them to gold. "I am not looking for the biggest ranch, Silas," she said. And it was the first time she had used his given name without the formal Mr. in front of it. The sound of it on her lips was both strange and deeply familiar. "I am looking for a good one." She paused, and her next words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. "I'm not looking for a match. I'm looking for a home." She said it so simply. A home, not a house, not a piece of land, but a home. And in that moment, standing by the fence line under the vast Montana sky, he understood that she had been building one here all along, with every clean floor, every mended shirt, every shared silence. She had been taking the empty vessel of his house and slowly, patiently, filling it with life again. He had no answer for her. He just picked up the tamper and went back to work, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and a terrifying, unfamiliar flicker of hope. That conversation by the fence changed the air between them. The quiet was still there, but now it was charged with unspoken things. He found himself watching her more than ever, not as a hired hand, but as a woman. He noticed the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when Gus did something clumsy, the quiet strength in her hands. And the arithmetic began to haunt him. 54 and 25. He would write the numbers in the dust with a stick while he was supposed to be checking on the cattle. He would see them in his mind as he tried to fall asleep at night. The gap was 29 years, 29 years of life, of experience, of winters and sorrows. He had lived almost an entire lifetime before she had even been born. It was not just foolish, it was wrong. The town would talk. Abernathy's knowing glances would turn to gossip. They would call him an old fool taking advantage of a young, desperate girl. They would say she was just after his land. The world had its arithmetic, and their story would not add up in its ledger. He tried to convince himself it was his duty to protect her from that, and from himself. He tried to think of Martha. What would she think? He could almost hear her voice, practical and kind. She's a good girl, Silas. She deserves a young man, a full life. He owed it to Martha's memory, he told himself, not to disgrace it by indulging in this fantasy. He grew distant. He stopped waiting for her to join him for coffee in the mornings, taking his cup out to the barn instead. He found jobs for them to do on opposite ends of the ranch. He answered her questions in monosyllables. He was trying to rebuild the walls he had let crumble. He was trying to make the house feel empty again, so he would be prepared for when it inevitably was. Alara, for her part, did not press him. She simply watched him with those steady, knowing eyes. She continued her work. The coffee was still on the table every morning, even if he did not drink it there. A plate of food was always left for him on the stove, even if he came in long after she had gone to her room. She did not fight his distance with words. She fought it with quiet, relentless care. She was showing him a different kind of math, the kind that was not about subtraction and division, but about addition. One evening, he was sitting on the porch watching the last of the light bleed from the sky. Gus rested his heavy head on his knee. The ache in his chest was back, sharper than it had been in years. It was the ache of a fresh loss, not an old one. He was mourning something he had never even allowed himself to have. Ilara came out and sat on the top step a few feet away. She did not speak for a long time. "You are a good man, Silas Croft," she said at last, her voice soft in the twilight. He flinched. "Don't," he said, his voice hoarse. "Don't say that." "Why not?" she asked. "It's the truth. Because good men don't think the things I've been thinking," he said, the confession torn from him. "Good men don't look at a girl young enough to be their daughter, and—" He couldn't finish. The shame of it was too great. "And what?" she prompted gently, and wished she would stay and feel his house become a home for the first time in years, and see a woman who is not defined by the number of years she has lived, but by the strength of her character. He turned to look at her, stunned into silence. Her face was calm in the gathering dark. "The world will do its arithmetic," she said, as if she had been listening to the thoughts in his head. "Let them. Their sums are small. They count years. They don't count kindness. They don't count respect. They don't count the feeling of rightness when two people sit on a porch together and the silence is a comfort, not a burden." She was giving him the answer. She was showing him the other way of counting. It was not about his age versus hers. It was about his loneliness versus her steadiness, his grief versus her hope. It was about the value of a person, not their date of manufacture. It was the kind of counting Martha had understood. And in that moment, he realized Martha would not have seen this as a betrayal. She would have seen it as a blessing. She would have wanted the silence in his life to be filled. He had a choice. He could listen to the cold, hard arithmetic of the world and send her away, returning to his safe, gray existence. He could be sensible, or he could listen to the quiet truth she had just spoken. He could be brave. For 5 years, he had not had to be brave. He had only had to endure. He looked out at his land, at the dark shapes of the mountains against the star-dusted sky. It was his land, his home. But it was just a place. She was the one who had made it feel like a home again. To let her go would be the most foolish, most impractical thing he could possibly do. It would be a failure of courage. He made his decision. He would not be practical. He would not be sensible. He would walk across the field anyway. He did not say anything more that night. But the next morning he came into the kitchen and sat down at the table. He drank the coffee she had poured for him. The war inside him was over. A few days later, he found her in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, tending to the new bean sprouts. The sun was warm on his back. He stood there for a moment, watching the careful way she worked. He had not planned what he would say. He did not have any soaring words. He only had the plain truth. He cleared his throat. She looked up, shielding her eyes with a dirt-smudged hand. "Elara," he began, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. "I've been thinking." She waited, her expression patient. "This place, this ranch, it's too much for one person," he said. "And this house, it needs a mistress, not just a hired hand." He took a breath. The words felt huge, terrifying, and absolutely right. "I was wondering if you would consider being that person, as my wife." He had said it. The words hung in the quiet air between them, surrounded by the smell of rich earth and growing things. He braced himself for rejection, for a kind refusal, for the pity in her eyes. She slowly got to her feet, brushing the dirt from her knees. She looked at him and her eyes were shining. There was no surprise in them. It was as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. He felt the need to be honest, to give her one last chance to choose the sensible path. "You should find a younger man, Alara," he said, his voice low. "A man who can give you more years." A slow smile spread across her face, a smile of such warmth and certainty that it seemed to light up the whole garden. She took a step closer to him. She whispered, "I already found the right one." The relief that washed over him was so profound it almost brought him to his knees. He reached out and took her hand. Her hand was small and calloused from work, and it fit in his as if it were made to be there. They were married a week later, on a Tuesday, the same day of the week she had arrived. The ceremony was at the small church in town, with the preacher and Mr. Abernathy and his wife as witnesses. Elara wore a simple blue dress she had made herself. Silas wore his only suit. There was talk, of course. He could feel the stares as they walked down the street to the courthouse to sign the papers. He heard the whispers, but he did not care. He held Elara's hand, and the arithmetic of the world faded into an insignificant noise. He was counting differently now. 2 years passed. The ranch thrived. The silence of the big house was gone forever, replaced by the sound of life. It was filled with Elara's quiet humming, with conversations over the dinner table, and eventually with the gurgling laughter of a baby boy, whom they named Samuel after Silas's father. The house was no longer too large. It was just right. It fit the shape of their family perfectly. One summer evening, Silas sat on the porch in the same rocking chair where he had once nursed his solitary grief. The chair's arm, which had been loose for years, was now firm and steady. Elara had fixed it. Gus, older now and grayer around the muzzle, slept at his feet. In the yard, Elara was holding Samuel's small hands, helping him take wobbly steps in the soft grass. The boy stumbled and fell onto the lawn with a soft thump and a delighted squeal. Elara laughed, a sound as clear and sweet as a river stone worn smooth. She looked up and caught Silas's eye. She smiled that same certain smile from the garden, a smile that said everything. It said, "See, this is the right sum. This is the life we have built." He felt a sense of peace so deep it felt like the bedrock of the mountains themselves. The past was not gone. The memory of Martha was a gentle presence, a part of the story that had led him here, but the sharp edges of the grief had been worn away, replaced by a quiet, profound gratitude. He had not expected this. He had not expected anything. And yet, life, in its mysterious and beautiful way, had given him everything. She picked up their son and came to sit on the steps beside him, leaning her head against his knee. Samuel reached out a tiny hand and patted Gus's sleeping head. The four of them sat there together, a family, watching the sun set on their home. It is a strange and wonderful truth that the most important decisions in our lives are often the ones that make the least sense on paper. The world has a way of teaching us a very specific kind of arithmetic. It teaches us to count years, to count dollars, to measure distance and calculate odds. It tells us to be practical, to be sensible, to choose the path that is safest and most easily explained. It is the math of fear. Silas Croft was a man who understood that math. He lived by it. His life had been reduced to a simple, cold equation of loss and endurance. He was 54 and she was 25. The world looked at those numbers and saw a problem, an imbalance, something that did not add up. The world saw a foolish old man and an opportunistic young woman. The world, in its haste to calculate, failed to see the truth. But Ilara brought with her a different kind of knowledge. It was the wisdom of the soul, which does not count in years, but in character. It does not measure wealth in acres, but in kindness. It does not calculate the future, it builds it, one small, decent act at a time. She saw not an old man, but a good one. She saw not an empty house, but a place that was waiting for a home to be built inside it. The story of Silas and Ilara is not about a May-December romance. It is about the courage to reject the world's flawed arithmetic and to learn a new way of counting. It is about understanding that the value of a person has nothing to do with their age. It is measured in their capacity for love, their resilience in the face of hardship, their quiet integrity, and their ability to see the worth in another soul. Silas's great act of courage was not in proposing to a younger woman. It was in finally allowing himself to believe that he was worthy of happiness again. It was in choosing to see the world through Ilara's eyes, to see value where the world saw only a problem. We are all at times tempted to live by the world's math. We let our age, our past, our fears, and the opinions of others dictate the boundaries of our lives. But the greatest lives are lived by those who dare to count differently, those who understand that a shared silence can be worth more than 1,000 empty conversations, that a steady hand can be more valuable than a full purse, and that a true home is not a place you own, but a person you love. Silas learned that the emptiness in his life was not a fact, but a choice, and he chose finally to fill it. Thank you for your time and your attention. It is the most valuable thing you have, and the fact that you share it here is what keeps this channel and these stories alive. I hope that wherever you are surrounded by people who know how to count the things that truly matter. Until next time, be well.